As a society, we have this sort of unspoken agreement with the penal system. You build the thick walls, you lock the heavy doors, and the rest of us get to sleep soundly at night, right? We naturally think of jails and prisons as these absolute containment zones. But what if those exact same systems, the ones designed to isolate dangerous people, accidentally handed them a direct map to your front door? Welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to unpack three intensely chilling, true accounts where the real horror absolutely did not end when the jail doors opened. In fact, for the people in these stories, that is exactly where the nightmare began. So, what actually happens when the bars don't protect you? We just assume that physical separation equals total safety. But as we're going to see through these heavily documented experiences, a locked room doesn't always keep the monsters away. Sometimes, unfortunately, it just locks you inside with them. Let's dive right into our first account. It's a story that proves how one minor mistake can literally shatter your illusion of safety forever. Act 1. The Danger of Proximity. Picture this. An 18-year-old kid makes a monumentally bad decision to shoplift a phone from Walmart. Within an hour, instead of just getting a slap on the wrist or a ticket, he's handcuffed, stripped, and thrown into a county jail holding cell for the entire weekend waiting for a court date. He is terrified. He's totally out of his depth among hardened inmates. But the real threat wasn't someone aggressive. It was actually his quiet 40-something cellmate on the lower bunk, a guy named Bob. Now, at first, Bob seemed kind of like a relief, a calm voice explaining the jail routine. But that relief vanished incredibly fast. Bob started asking these hyper-specific questions. Where do you live? Do you have a girlfriend? He'd sit way too close, repeatedly touching the teen's shoulder and knee. Well, the kid survives the 48 hours, gets released, and thinks, okay, thank God it's over. But days later, he gets a bizarre message from a blurry Instagram profile. Then, on a foggy afternoon when he's home alone, a ratty car parks outside his house, and someone methodically tests the front and back doorknobs. Finally, a week later, the teen is at a dive bar, and who does he spot? Bob, wearing a baseball cap pulled low, just staring at him from across the room, smiling. And that blurry Instagram account I mentioned, it sent a selfie of Bob's face, uncomfortably close to the lens, with this exact chilling caption, "Miss you already." I mean, just think about the immense psychological violation happening here. This teenager was safely in his own bedroom, miles and miles away from that county jail, only to realize that the predator he was locked in an 8x8 cell with had somehow figured out his real identity. How on earth did a complete stranger from lockup track him down online? Well, after the kid brought his parents to the police precinct to get a restraining order, and by the way, they found out Bob wasn't even his real name, the terrifying mechanics of how the stalker operated became crystal clear. See, when someone is booked into a county jail, their arrest information often becomes public record. So all a predator has to do is wait until they're released, search the public booking logs for the name of the kid they shared a cell with, and then simply cross-reference that name with public social media profiles. Without meaning to, the justice system inadvertently handed a predator a permanent tracking device. Moving on to Act 2, The Danger of the Forgotten. For our second story, we're following two friends who decided to go urban exploring in a massive, abandoned prison at 1 a.m. As soon as they stepped inside, they hit this suffocating atmosphere. They're armed with nothing but flashlights, wandering into this imposing structure with high arching roofs and a giant cross at its peak. The source material notes they were hit instantly with the heavy, dense smell of must and old wood. Their flashlight beams are just catching these thick streams of dust hanging in the dead air as they walk past open, rusting cells. And then, a loud crashing noise echoes through the pitch black. It stopped them absolutely dead in their tracks. They turned back toward the main cell block and realized with pure horror that a man was standing just 20 feet away from them in the dark. The guy holds up his hands, says his name is Mike, and claims he's a security guard hired to detain trespassers. But listen to how quickly our protagonist's survival instincts fired up just by looking at him. If you run into a security guard, what do you expect? Right? A recognizable uniform, maybe a badge, a utility belt, a radio. But Mike? He was way too casual. He's wearing jeans, white sneakers, and a flannel shirt over a black sweatshirt. Plus, his tone was just dangerously smooth. Every single instinct in the protagonist's body was screaming that this guy was not security. He was a threat. So the girls agree to leave, but Mike refuses to let them go out the front door they had literally just walked through, claiming the ceiling had collapsed over there. Instead, he starts leading them deeper and deeper into the bowels of this crumbling prison in the exact opposite direction of the exit. And as they're walking, he just keeps repeating this phrase with this creepy, perfectly calm cadence, "Don't worry, we're almost there." Let's quickly tally up the escalating red flags here. The front door they used had been completely unlatched, basically an open invitation. Mike's outfit was entirely wrong for a guard. He was actively trying to herd them and disorient them. But the breaking point? Mike opens a door, revealing a narrow, pitch-black basement staircase. You literally couldn't see the bottom. When the girls refuse to go down into the darkness, Mike steps onto the stairs, reaches up, grabs the protagonist's arm gently but firmly, and tries to physically pull her down. Her friend Laura immediately screams, shoves Mike incredibly hard, sending him stumbling down the steps, yells "run," and they both just sprinted blindly back to that front entrance that, surprise, surprise, was not collapsed at all. They got to their car and peeled out in sheer terror. A week goes by, and the protagonist is so shaken, she actually confesses the break-in to the local police. The cop she spoke to was totally speechless, but not because they were trespassing. The police confirmed that this abandoned prison has absolutely no security guards, no patrols, no cameras, nothing. The chilling reality is summed up perfectly in the source. Whoever they met was not a friendly person. To this day, she is haunted by the phantom feeling of her hand grabbing her arm, and she still wonders what horrific fate was waiting for them at the bottom of those basement stairs. Act 3, the danger of the unknown. Okay, now we are elevating from immediate physical danger to intense psychological paranoia. We have a corrections officer, a CO, who kept strictly to himself. He had just moved clear across the country to work at a local jail, he had absolutely zero social media, and he kept things purely professional. But there was this one guy, a seemingly model inmate named Edgar, who possessed something way scarier than a homemade weapon. 1,000 miles. That is the impossible distance between the jail where this CO worked and his actual hometown. It is absolutely crucial to keep that number in mind because of what happens next. One day, out of nowhere, inmate Edgar walks up to the CO and just casually asks how his brother, Stan, is doing. Talk about a deeply unsettling shift in power dynamics, right? At first, the CO just brushed off the comment about his brother as some bizarre coincidence. But days later, Edgar casually asks if the CO's mother, Diana, still lives by the lake. And later on, he asks if his nephew is still a big fan of baseball. Now, compare Edgar's claims to the CO's actual reality. The CO's own coworkers didn't even know he had a brother. He had zero social media footprint for anyone to scrape. And when the CO panicked and looked up Edgar's file, it showed Edgar had been born and raised locally. He had never even stepped foot within 1,000 miles of the CO's home state. Edgar was essentially omniscient. He somehow possessed deeply private family details that were literally impossible for him to know.
Naturally, the CO reports this totally bizarre cat and mouse game to his supervisor. But the supervisor just dismisses it, figuring Edgar is only trying to provoke a reaction to file a lawsuit against the jail. So the CO just has to endure this weird psychological torture every single day. Finally, Edgar's release date arrives, and as he's walking out the door, he flashes this weird, ominous smile at the CO and drops this parting message. Maybe I'll see you around.
Months go by. The CO finally settles into his life and even starts dating someone. But then, the timeline of terror kicks into gear. One morning, while the CO is over at his girlfriend's house, his Ring camera back home sends him an alert. A hooded man is standing perfectly still at his front door, softly asking, "You home?" before giving this completely bizarre excuse about selling meat from a truck. The next night, right at 2 a.m., the camera sensor trips, but the porch is totally empty. The following night, again at 2 a.m., the doorbell rings. It's the same hooded man, reaching for the doorknob, whispering into the camera, "Is anybody home? You should open the door." The CO is furious. He speaks through the camera app, announces he's law enforcement, and demands the guy leave immediately. The man freezes. Then he slowly lifts his head up to the lens, and a huge smile spreads across his face. It's Edgar. The on-mission inmate had found his house. Now, what makes this story profoundly disturbing is the aftermath. Edgar didn't panic and run away like a normal criminal when confronted by a cop. He just slowly turned and walked down the street. And guess what? There was no meat truck. He just vanished into the night shadows. When the CO dug back into the system, the facts were chilling. Edgar had no known family, he had no previous addresses on file, and when his parole officer went to go check on him, he was completely gone. Roughly a month later, someone matching Edgar's description rang the doorbell at the girlfriend's house at 10:30 p.m. and then silently walked away down the street. Edgar had essentially become a ghost, leaving the CO to live his life in a state of permanent sleepless paranoia. Which brings us to our conclusion.
the lingering nightmare.
If we take a step back and synthesize what we've learned from these three deeply unsettling stories, a really clear, alarming pattern emerges. For the teenagers stalked by Bob, for the explorers hunted by Mike in the dark, and for the corrections officer haunted by Edgar, the true horror definitely did not end when they escaped the immediate physical threat. It really all boils down to this. The bars of a cell are meant to keep danger in, but as we've seen today, sometimes they just trap you inside with it. And occasionally, whether it's through public records, sheer terrifying audacity, or some unexplainable stalker-level knowledge, that danger follows you home. The very system designed to separate us from the darkest parts of society can sometimes act as a deadly networking event for predators.
So I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. If the walls and systems meant to contain monsters only end up giving them the tools to find you, where are you truly safe? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep your doors locked, stay aware of your surroundings, and never underestimate who might be standing just out of sight in the dark. I'll catch you next time.